The sonar return came back wrong at a depth of 4 kilometers, and Lena Vasari was the first person on the submersible to notice. She had been pressed against the porthole for the last 20 minutes, watching the seafloor of the Yathara Basin scroll beneath the lights. The ocean floor down here was a pale, featureless gray, the kind of gray that had never seen sunlight and never would. And then the sonar return spiked. The display beside her porthole lit amber, and through the reinforced glass she saw the first wall. Not a cliff face, not a geological shelf, a wall, cut smooth, straight-edged, rising from the silt at a 90-degree angle, and along its face a dense column of glyph script. She had her tablet out before she knew she had reached for it. Vasari, that was Director Hodgen from the forward station, the expedition lead who had organized this dive over 3 years and 2 funding cycles. He did not turn around. "We're still on approach. Save the recording for the platform." "The glyphs on the outer wall are active," Lena said. She kept her voice level. She was 24, the youngest person on the dive team by 8 years, and she had learned that level voices carried more weight than urgent ones. "They're not dormant inscription. The inner rings are cycling." "That's instrument interference. We're inside the thermal layer." She looked at her tablet. The glyph cluster was cycling in a pattern she recognized from the partial translation she had spent 2 years building from surface scan fragments. Not interference. Not passive inscription. A greeting protocol, the kind of iterative address that ancient scripts used to identify a receiving party before delivering a message. She said nothing more. She took the recording and filed it. The Velishar ruins had been on the survey charts for 40 years, a sonar anomaly 600 meters across, at a depth that made manned access genuinely expensive. Orbital scans, deep scan probes, 2 generations of ROV deployments, all confirmed the same things. The ruins were large, structurally intact in a way that defied the geological age of the seafloor around them. And at their center stood a spire, 200 meters of crystalline material that no spectroscopic analysis had ever successfully identified, still putting out a faint, regular pulse. Every probe that had approached within 50 meters had experienced complete systems shutdown. The probes were not destroyed. They were simply stopped, set down on the seafloor with the precision of something that had decided they were not the intended visitor and left there. The expedition's plan was to dock at the outer platform and conduct ground surveys. The spire was the objective, but a secondary one. Nobody had any serious theory about how to get near it. When the hatch unsealed and the team moved out onto the platform in dive gear, the city revealed itself in every direction. Dark towers, still intact, broad avenues paved in smooth stone, structures of no immediately obvious purpose, their geometry clean and deliberate, and without the weathering or collapse that a 5,000-year submersion should have produced. The ocean floor here was undisturbed by any sediment patterns that should have accumulated. The city was not preserved. The city was maintained. Nobody on the team said anything about that for several minutes. They stood in a semicircle at the dock's edge, lights cutting the 4-kilometer dark, and they looked. Lena Vasari crossed the platform and put her hand on the nearest wall. The wall's glyph script lit under her palm. It was not dramatic, no surge of light, no sound, no vibration she could feel through her suit. A single narrow strip of inscription at the height of her shoulder shifted from the flat, inactive gray-green of dormant crystal to a pale gold that threw no shadows but was clearly, unmistakably, luminous. It stayed lit. She moved her hand along the wall and the next strip lit in the same fashion. She ignored the team behind her and read the first strip. The language of the Velishar ruins had no formal name in the academic literature because no one had agreed on an adequate transcription system. Lena had built her own part of her graduate work, mostly unpublished, based on partial inscriptions from the ROV surface scans. Her system was imperfect. The phonemic reconstruction of a language from written inscription alone, without any spoken reference, was an exercise in controlled guessing, but the inner structure of the glyphs was consistent enough that she had identified grammatical markers, pronoun analogues, and verb-like clusters that implied action or identity. The first strip said approximately, "Platform entry recognized, designation pending." She wrote it down and moved to the second strip. Hodgen called the team together for a briefing. Lena attended with her tablet in hand and half her attention on the wall. The priorities were standard: structural assessment of the outer ring, material sampling of the roadway, documentation of the largest intact buildings before any approach to the spire. The wall behind her glowed steadily the entire time. Nobody on the team approached it again. They worked for 2 hours on the outer ring. Lena moved between the team and the wall, recording inscriptions, building a running translation. The wall was giving her more than the surface scan fragments had ever contained: full clause structures, extended lines of grammar, chains of address she could follow for 4 or 5 statements before the vocabulary ran past what she had. At the 2-hour mark, she turned from the wall and walked into the city. She did not announce it. She moved between 2 outer ring structures onto the broad central avenue that ran straight toward the spire, and she kept walking. She heard Hodgen's voice in her calm 30 seconds later. "Vasari, you're off plan. There's an inscription sequence on the avenue that reads as a pathway marker," she said. "I want to follow it. The inner city is not cleared. The inner city has been sealed for 5,000 years and is structurally intact. It is safer than most surface sites." She paused. "I'm staying on comms. I'm not approaching the spire. I just want the avenue inscription." A silence. "Don't lose line of sight to the dock." She was already past line of sight to the dock, but the comm was holding. She kept walking. The avenue inscription was extraordinary. She had 400 words of running text on her tablet before she reached the midpoint, and the text was coherent, the longest continuous passage of Velashar language she had ever worked with. It was a history. A compressed, formally structured account of something that had happened to this city. She could not read all of it. She could read enough. The city had been submerged deliberately, not catastrophically, not by disaster or war or geological accident. It had been lowered. The Velashar had moved their city beneath the surface of the Yathara Ocean as a protective measure, at a time when something external had threatened what the city contained. The city's central spire, she used the word she had reconstructed for it, which translated approximately as the living column, had been sealed at the same time, its function suspended, its recognition protocols locked to a specific condition. The condition was a phonemic key. Not a password, not a code. Something more precise than either. A speaker capable of forming certain phonemic sequences in the Velashar language at a complexity level that implied genuine comprehension rather than rote reproduction. The inscription described it with a clarity that made her read the passage twice. The living column would recognize the Vashari. The word appeared in the text not as a proper name but as a category, when the Vashari spoke the second inscription ring from memory. She stopped walking. The word Vashari appeared 4 more times in the text she had already transcribed. She had been uncertain of its meaning in the earlier scan fragments. In context, with the fuller grammar around it, it was not ambiguous. It meant something close to the one who carries the language forward. A keeper not of the city's physical structure, but of its linguistic record. The person whose function was to ensure the city's voice was not permanently lost. She looked at her tablet. She looked at the spire, now 40 meters in front of her. A thing of impossible clarity in the black water, its crystal surface pale and still, 200 meters of it rising from the city's center into the dark above. Behind her, she heard the team moving onto the avenue. Hodgen's lights cut the water 200 meters back. She walked to the spire's base. The inscription ring ran around the circumference of the spire at chest height. A continuous band of dense glyph script 30 centimeters wide. She had seen it in the ROV scans, but the resolution had been too low to read it. In person, it was the clearest inscription she had ever encountered, the glyphs sharp, deep-cut, and cycling at a faster rate than the outer wall, completing a full rotation every 3 or 4 seconds. She read the first quarter of the ring. She read the second quarter. The spire's surface was visibly warmer than the surrounding water. She could see the thermal distortion in her lights, the faint shimmer of rising current from the crystal. The ring was not just cycling. It was active. It had been active and waiting for 5,000 years, running this loop, checking for the condition that would let it proceed. She put the tablet away. She began to read the inscription ring aloud. Her pronunciation was imperfect. She knew that. The phonemic reconstruction had been built from inference and 3 years of patient error correction, and there were sounds in the Velishar system that she was not certain human vocal anatomy could reproduce accurately. She made each sound as correctly as she could. She did not rush. She followed the ring from its start marker through its full rotation, watching the glyphs as she spoke them, adjusting her pronunciation when a glyph's form suggested an inflection she had been rendering too flatly. Hodgin reached the spire's base when she was halfway through the ring. He stopped beside her without speaking. She heard him breathing in the calm. The crystal surface shifted at the 3/4 mark, a movement she felt as much as saw, a deep structural resonance that passed through her suit and into her chest like a sound below hearing. The cycling in the inscription ring slowed. Each glyph completed its rotation and held, settling into a static position for the first time, one after another, locking in sequence as her reading reached them. By the time she completed the ring's final clause, the entire band stood still and fully illuminated, not in the pale gold of the outer wall, but in deep, clear amber, warm and steady, brighter than her dive lights, throwing actual color across the avenue stones around her. The city responded. It began at the spire's base and spread outward in both directions, a network of channels cut into the stone, which Lena had noted and catalogued and not yet understood, now filling with the same deep amber light, running along the roadway out toward the outer ring and beyond, tracing the full architecture of the city in lines of warm gold that moved like water finding its level. The towers lit from within. The buildings lit. The outer wall lit. Every surface that held inscription, and she understood now that every surface held inscription, that the entire city was written, wall and floor and ceiling and tower and avenue, one unbroken continuous text, filled with amber light. Not blazing but steady, the quiet sufficiency of something that has been waiting for permission to be itself and has finally received it. Hodgin made a sound, not words, just the breath that leaves a person when something that was not possible becomes real in front of them. Behind him, she could see the team's lights scattered and still along the avenue. Nobody was moving. She did not turn around. She looked at the spire. In the crystal above the inscription ring at the height of her face, a secondary inscription was forming, not lit from within but rising. Individual glyphs materializing on the surface, assembling from nothing, pushing through the crystal the way ice forms on cold glass. She watched them assemble. She read them as they came. The first line was an address. It said, in the grammar of formal Velishar recognition, the one we set aside the language for. The second line was a designation. 2 words in a register she had not seen anywhere in the avenue text, an older register, more formal, the kind of form used for proper titles that predated the city's submersion. Vashari returned, speak the charge. Lena stood still at the base of the spire while the city burned amber around her, while the team held motionless on the avenue, while 5,000 years of careful suspension arrived at the moment it had been built to reach. She read the words twice. She took the time to understand them correctly. The city had not been waiting to be found. It had been waiting to be spoken to. Everything that had come before, the probes, the surveys, the scans, The 40 years of surface study had been the wrong kind of attention. The city did not need to be examined. It needed its keeper. She had not known she was that. She had built the language reconstruction as a graduate project, on the straightforward logic that a language was worth understanding on its own terms, that the texts deserved to be read accurately, and that nobody else had done the work carefully enough. She had done it because it was the right thing to do with an unknown language. Learn it, not scan it, not catalog it. Learn it. The Velishar, it turned out, had anticipated that reasoning exactly. She cleared her throat. The calm was still live. Behind her, nobody spoke. She voiced the charge, the formal acknowledgement the inscription was asking for, a short responsive clause she had already translated from the Avenue text, the linguistic equivalent of saying, "I hear you, I understand the weight of this, I accept the role." 6 words in a language that had waited 5 millennia for someone who understood what they were saying, at the base of a crystal tower that had kept a drowned city breathing in the dark. The spire's inscription band completed its final transition, every glyph standing clear and fully bright, the amber light doubling and then settling to a steady warmth she could feel through the suit material against her face. From far above, inside the crystal, a slow pulse began, deep amber, unhurried, regular. Not an alarm, not a warning. The heartbeat of something that has just woken from a very long sleep and found the world still turning. Lena Vasari put her hand flat against the spire's surface. The city held its light. She would spend the next 3 years on Yathara, learning what the city said. The Velishar had written everything down, their science, their history, their reasoning, the full account of why they had gone beneath the ocean and what they had placed there for safekeeping. She would not understand most of it quickly. Understanding it well would be the work of a lifetime. That was, she had always thought, exactly what a language was for.